In the 2023 general elections, every major political party going into the Southwest had a single strategic assumption baked into their planning. That assumption was this: the coalition that delivered those governorship margins, the coalition that moved the numbers in Lagos, in Oyo, in Ogun, was stable, locked in, not going anywhere. MURIC has just told you publicly, formally, and on the record that assumption is dead. The Muslim Rights Concern, one of the most organized religious civil society structures in southern Nigeria, has issued an ultimatum to every party contesting the 2027 Southwest elections. No Muslim candidate at the top of your ticket, no Southwest Muslim votes for your party. Full stop. Now, every headline you've seen on this story frames it as a religious representation issue. And on the surface, that's not wrong. But here is the question that nobody, not one newspaper, not one political analyst on television has actually asked. Which specific party has the institutional capacity to satisfy that demand and survive its own internal politics if it tries? Because there is a mechanism sitting inside at least one of the three major parties contesting the Southwest, a mechanism sitting inside at least one of the three major parties contesting the Southwest, an appointment structure whose outcome in the coming months will determine whether MURIC's ultimatum is a masterstroke or a miscalculation. We are going to get to exactly what that mechanism is, who controls it, and why it is the real story underneath this headline. But first, who authorized this declaration, why now, and why is the real target not the presidential race? Before we go further, if you're new here, this channel exists for one reason: to give Nigerians the political analysis mainstream media is too afraid or too compromised to deliver. Hit subscribe and stay with me, this gets deeper. Let's establish exactly what happened and what the timing tells us. Professor Ishaq Akintola, the director of MURIC, issued a formal position statement. The language was deliberate, the framing was institutional, and the distribution was national. This was not a community leader speaking at a town hall. This was a structured civil society declaration designed to reach party leadership, political journalists, and crucially, it was timed to land before any major party has concluded its internal primary architecture for 2027. That timing is not incidental. It is the entire point. The surface narrative being pushed by commentators and by MURIC itself is that it is about religious representation for Yoruba Muslim voters demanding representation after decades of being politically invisible in Southwest ticket composition. That grievance is legitimate and it is old. But here is what that surface narrative misses completely. MURIC has issued strong pre-election statements before. In previous cycles, those statements generated press coverage, produced some party outreach, and then largely dissolved before primary season because parties calculated, correctly in those cycles, that the Southwest Muslim vote would not cohere as a disciplined bloc regardless of the ultimatum. So why is 2027 different? What changed? Go back to 2002 and 2003. Northern Christian minorities in Kaduna and Plateau states issued similar bloc declarations ahead of governorship primaries. The parties that dismissed those declarations did not lose because of low voter turnout. They lost because the bloc actively worked for the opposition, knocked on doors, mobilized transport, activated mosque and church networks for the other side. MURIC has studied that playbook in detail. And here is the pattern interrupt, the data point that reframes the entire story before we even get to the party calculations. According to National Population Commission estimates and INEC's 2023 voter registration figures, Muslims constitute somewhere between 35 and 42% of registered voters across Lagos, Ogun, and Oyo states combined. In a three-way competitive race, which is exactly what 2027 is shaping up to be, with APC, PDP, and ADC all contesting seriously, you do not need a majority bloc to decide an election. You need a plurality bloc that is organized, that has infrastructure, and that is angry. MURIC is telling you in advance and in public precisely how to make them angry. That is not a threat, that is a negotiating position with a deadline.
Now let's go beneath the headlines and into the institutional mechanics, because this is where the real story lives. Nigeria's Electoral Act does not prohibit religious identity as a criterion in candidate selection. INEC's framework governs inclusion, who can run, who can vote, but it does not govern ticket composition. Neither do party constitutions in any explicit way. This means MURIC's demand exists in a legal gray zone that no court can strike down as unconstitutional and no party can formally reject without appearing to discriminate against a religious group. That ambiguity is not an oversight. MURIC is deliberately occupying that space because it is unassailable from the outside. Let's be specific about which party this ultimatum helps, which it damages, and which it potentially weaponizes. ADC, the African Democratic Congress, benefits most immediately and most cleanly. It holds no Southwest governorship. It has no incumbent power structure to protect, no sitting governors whose political base would fracture if a Muslim name appeared at the top of the ticket. For ADC, nominating a credible Muslim candidate costs nothing internally and potentially gains it in organized bloc with real mobilization infrastructure. ADC will move first on this. Watch for it. APC faces the sharpest internal contradiction of the three. Its Southwest governors, its state party machinery, its ward-level structures, these are predominantly drawn from Christian Yoruba political networks that have been built over years. Any serious attempt to front a Muslim candidate at the top of an APC Southwest ticket risks fracturing that base before the primary is even concluded. The party cannot publicly yield to MURIC's demand without triggering an internal revolt. And it cannot publicly reject it without alienating a bloc it will need in the general election. APC is caught, and it knows it. PDP's Southwest structure is too weak at the moment to capitalize directly, but here is the calculation that makes PDP relevant in this story anyway. A MURIC-aligned swing, even a partial one, in a three-way race can make PDP's numbers decisive in ways they would not otherwise be. PDP doesn't need to win, it needs APC to lose. And a mobilized MURIC bloc, even at 60 or 70% of its declared potential, can produce exactly that outcome in Lagos or Oyo. Here is something that has been almost entirely absent from the mainstream analysis of this story. Bola Tinubu's 2023 presidential run was constructed in part on a deliberate appeal to Southwest Muslim identity. The Muslim-Muslim ticket debate consumed the national political conversation for the better part of 6 months. What is less discussed is that the Southwest Muslim vote was not monolithic in 2023. It was split in some local governments, suppressed in others, and in several areas quietly redirected to Atiku Abubakar's PDP candidacy by community networks that felt the Tinubu ticket was taking their votes for granted rather than earning them. MURIC's 2027 declaration is, in its deepest logic, a renegotiation of what the Southwest Muslim vote is worth on the open political market. The parties that engage MURIC seriously before 2026, before primaries open, will have leverage in that negotiation. The parties that dismiss this as noise will find a mobilized, angry, organized counterbloc that they did not budget for and cannot neutralize at short notice. There is a layer of this story that almost nobody is naming, and it is this. The real internal tension here is not simply Muslim versus Christian in the Southwest. It is old Yoruba establishment politics versus an emerging religious identity politics that cuts across class lines. Afenifere and the broader pan-Yoruba nationalist tradition it represents has historically subordinated religious identity to ethnic solidarity. The dominant framework has been, we are Yoruba first, and everything else, religion, party affiliation, class, is secondary to that. MURIC's ultimatum is a direct challenge to that hierarchy. It is saying explicitly, for this constituency, religious identity is now a primary mobilization framework. That fractures the assumption that pan-Yoruba solidarity automatically overrides religious bloc logic when election day arrives. Pay close attention to who has not spoken since MURIC's declaration. The Sultan of Sokoto has not responded, northern PDP governors have not responded, and Aso Rock has been completely silent. Each of those silences is a signal, and they are not all the same signal. The Sultan's silence suggests this is being watched at the highest levels of northern Islamic leadership as a precedent-setting event, specifically whether organized religious bloc ultimatum politics can be institutionally normalized in the south the way it has been in the north, and without triggering federal-level blowback. If MURIC's ultimatum succeeds, that precedent matters enormously for every future election cycle in every region of this country. The presidency's silence is more calculated than the Sultan's. Any statement from Aso Rock on MURIC's ultimatum, any statement at all, activates the Southwest Muslim-Christian fault line that the Tinubu administration absolutely cannot afford to crack open ahead of 2027. So they say nothing, and they watch.
MURIC is not a community association that runs on goodwill and volunteer time. It operates with legal representation, media infrastructure, national mobilization capacity, and sustained public communications. During an active election cycle, that infrastructure costs money, real money. The question of who finances MURIC's operation during this specific 2027 mobilization window is one that not one major newspaper has asked publicly. And that question matters because funding sources shape the demands that get made. The demands that get made shape the negotiations that follow, and the negotiations that follow produce outcomes, appointments, contracts, policy positions that are never announced in a press release. Now, there is a specific institutional connection that ties everything I've just laid out into a single pressure point, and it sits inside APC's internal structure. There is a Southwest Zonal Coordinator role within the APC National Working Committee, whose appointment power determines which candidate names advance to the Presidential Screening Committee for federal tickets. That coordinator role, who holds it now, who is positioning to hold it going into 2027, and what conditions are attached to that appointment, is the exact institutional lever that MURIC's ultimatum is designed to pressure, not from the outside, from within the party's own gatekeeping mechanism. We will come back to what that means fully in a moment. But here's what almost nobody has connected yet, and it changes the entire picture. Let's zoom out from the Southwest and look at what this moment actually means for Nigeria as a whole. Because if you think this story ends in Ibadan or Lagos, you are missing the larger architecture. If MURIC's ultimatum produces a successful outcome, meaning a Muslim candidate is nominated at the top of a Southwest ticket, and that candidate performs demonstrably better as a direct result of organized religious bloc support, that outcome will be studied and replicated. It will be replicated with precision. South-South Christian minorities already have latent versions of the same demand. Middle Belt religious blocs have been watching the northern political model for years. Northern Christian communities in states like Kaduna, Plateau, and Benue have historical grievances that map almost exactly onto the MURIC framework. What happens in the Southwest in 2027 is not a regional story, it is a national template, and the federal center, whichever party controls it by then, has a direct structural interest in whether that template is validated or collapsed, because a validated template accelerates the fragmentation of national party coalitions into ethno-religious sub-blocks that negotiate transactionally rather than build programmatic platforms. Lagos State alone generates over 30% of Nigeria's value-added tax. It hosts the headquarters of the overwhelming majority of Nigeria's private sector employers. The decisions made in Lagos Governor House on land use, on infrastructure concessions, on tax policy, and on security coordination ripple through the national economy in ways that no other state-level political outcome can match. Political uncertainty in Lagos governorship succession, which is precisely what MURIC's intervention introduces, is not just a political risk, it is a sovereign credit risk. It is something that international institutional investors price into their commitments when deciding whether to hold naira-denominated assets, whether to extend investment timelines, and whether Lagos's infrastructure concession framework MURIC is not a community association that runs on goodwill and volunteer time. It operates with legal representation, media infrastructure, national mobilization capacity, and sustained public communications. During an active election cycle, that infrastructure costs money, real money. The question of who finances MURIC's operation during this specific 2027 mobilization window is one that not one major newspaper has asked publicly. And that question matters because funding sources shape the demands that get made. The demands that get made shape the negotiations that follow, and the negotiations that follow produce outcomes, appointments, contracts, policy positions that are never announced in a press release. Now, there is a specific institutional connection that ties everything I've just laid out into a single pressure point, and it sits inside APC's internal structure. There is a Southwest Zonal Coordinator role within the APC National Working Committee, whose appointment power determines which candidate names advance to the Presidential Screening Committee for federal tickets. That coordinator role, who holds it now, who is positioning to hold it going into 2027, and what conditions are attached to that appointment, is the exact institutional lever that MURIC's ultimatum is designed to pressure, not from the outside, from within the party's own gatekeeping mechanism. We will come back to what that means fully in a moment, but here's what almost nobody has connected yet, and it changes the entire picture. Let's zoom out from the Southwest and look at what this moment actually means for Nigeria as a whole. Because if you think this story ends in Ibadan or Lagos, you are missing the larger architecture. If MURIC's ultimatum produces a successful outcome, meaning a Muslim candidate is nominated at the top of a Southwest ticket, and that candidate performs demonstrably better as a direct result of organized religious bloc support, that outcome will be studied and replicated. It will be replicated with precision. South-South Christian minorities already have latent versions of the same demand. Middle Belt religious blocs have been watching the Northern political model for years. Northern Christian communities in states like Kaduna, Plateau, and Benue have historical grievances that map almost exactly onto the MURIC framework. What happens in the Southwest in 2027 is not a regional story, it is a national template, and the federal center, whichever party controls it by then, has a direct structural interest in whether that template is validated or collapsed, because a validated template accelerates the fragmentation of national party coalitions into ethno-religious sub-blocks that negotiate transactionally rather than build programmatic platforms. Lagos State alone generates over 30% of Nigeria's value-added tax. It hosts the headquarters of the overwhelming majority of Nigeria's private sector employers. The decisions made in Lagos Governor House on land use, on infrastructure concessions, on tax policy, and on security coordination ripple through the national economy in ways that no other state-level political outcome can match. Political uncertainty in Lagos governorship succession, which is precisely what MURIC's intervention introduces, is not just a political risk, it is a sovereign credit risk. It is something that international institutional investors price into their commitment when deciding whether to hold Naira-denominated assets, whether to extend investment timelines, and whether Lagos's infrastructure concession framework is stable enough to underwrite. The Naira's trajectory, federal allocation politics, and the viability of the major infrastructure projects currently in pipeline, all of it is downstream of who governs Lagos after 2027. There is one key misconception that is shaping how most people are processing this story, and I want to correct it directly. Most people watching coverage of MURIC's declaration assume the target is the 2027 presidential race, that this is an intervention designed to influence which party fields a Muslim presidential candidate or running mate. It is not. The presidential ticket is the national headline, the real prize, the target that produces durable, institutional, long-term returns is the state-level governorship succession in Lagos and Oyo. Governors control appointments. Governors control state budgets. Governors control the security architecture that either protects or constrains the activities of civil society organizations operating within their states. A sympathetic governor in Lagos or Oyo is worth infinitely more to MURIC's long-term institutional power than a presidential ticket calculation that plays out at the national level where MURIC has less direct leverage.
MURIC is not playing for the national headline. It is playing for the state-level foundation that converts today's ultimatum into tomorrow's permanent institutional access. Now, if what I just told you surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know what you think before we get to the part that changes everything. Let me give you the concrete picture of what happens next and what to watch for. APC will not issue a formal response to MURIC's declaration. You will not see a press statement from the APC National Secretariat engaging this demand directly. What you will see instead, if you know where to look, is a quiet outreach campaign. Informal delegations to MURIC leadership, party figures attending mosque events in southwest states, the deliberate surfacing of Muslim names in speculative ticket conversations in Yoruba language media and political WhatsApp networks. This is how Nigerian parties absorb a demand without appearing to yield to it publicly. The response will be real, it will just be invisible to anyone not looking for it. ADC will move explicitly and early. Expect a formal public engagement, a delegation, a joint statement, a consultation framework, framed as ADC positioning itself as the party of genuine Southwest inclusion. Whether ADC has the internal primary architecture, the grassroots infrastructure, and the funding to follow through on that positioning is a different question. But ADC will make the first public move, and it will be designed to force APC and PDP to respond or look exclusionary by contrast. MURIC itself will escalate rather than wait. Watch for a second statement, more specific than the first, naming at least one party that has made contact, naming at least one that has not. That naming will be the opening of the real negotiation phase, conducted partially in public to maintain pressure and partially in private to allow face-saving maneuvers. The signals to watch. First, any change in the APC Southwest Zonal Coordinator appointment, even a deputy-level reshuffling that looks routine, signals that the party is internally negotiating with MURIC's institutional demand without saying so in public. Watch for that personnel move. It will happen quietly, and it will be framed as internal party administration. Second, watch for mosque-based voter registration drives beginning in Oyo and Lagos, organized by any civil society structure with MURIC network links. Voter registration is mobilization infrastructure. If organized registration drives begin in those corridors before mid-2026, 2027 is already operationally underway for MURIC, regardless of what any party has publicly committed to. Third, watch whether any sitting APC or PDP Southwest governor accepts a MURIC invitation to speak at a public event. Acceptance is a signal of engagement, that the governor's calculation is that MURIC's bloc is worth courting. Refusal is a signal that the governor has concluded they can win without it. Both are strategic declarations. Neither will be labeled as such.
At the very beginning, I asked who actually has the power to respond to MURIC's ultimatum and what they want in return. After everything we have worked through, the party structures, the zonal coordinator mechanism, the funding questions, the governorship succession logic, the economic conditions that have changed the calculus, the answer is this. The power does not sit with the presidential candidate. It does not sit with the national party chairman. It sits with the Southwest Party machinery, specifically the apparatus that controls gubernatorial ticket composition and the appointment pipeline that feeds it. And what that machinery wants in return for putting a viable Muslim name on the ticket is not abstract religious representation. It is the organized mosque network mobilization infrastructure that MURIC commands, switched on in their favor for the governorship race. This is a transactional negotiation. It is dressed in the language of rights and inclusion because that is the language that generates public sympathy and media coverage. But both sides understand the transaction. The open question is which party closes it first and on what terms. If religious bloc ultimatum politics is validated in the Southwest in 2027, if the party that meets MURIC's demand wins and the parties that don't lose, the 2031 cycle will not look like the 2027 cycle. Every major region will be running a version of this playbook. Every significant religious or ethnic civil society organization with mobilization capacity will have absorbed the lesson that structured ultimatums issued early and credibly produce returns that petitions and press statements never did. National party structures already hollowed out by godfatherism, by primaries for sale, by the replacement of ideology for transactional loyalty, will fragment further into ethno-religious sub-coalitions that negotiate with each other for specific, concrete returns. Nigeria will not break under that weight. It has carried heavier, but it will govern less. It will deliver less. It will extract more from public institutions and invest less in building them. I'll leave you with this, and I want you to sit with it before you scroll to the comments. MURIC says this is about rights, the right of a significant Yoruba Muslim population to see itself reflected in the tickets of parties that want its votes. The parties say this is about votes, a bloc that needs to be managed, accommodated, or neutralized before an election. But if the party that meets MURIC's demand wins in 2027, and the ones that don't lose, what does that tell us about what Nigerian democracy is actually selecting for? Is it selecting for the best governors, or is it selecting for the most effective transactions? Drop your answer in the comments. I'll be reading. If this analysis gave you clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what's really happening in Nigeria. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.